Good evening and welcome to the Institute of Directors event here at the Principal Hotel in York. We're delighted to be back face to face with a very small group of directors locally here at the Principal Hotel, but also live streaming on YouTube and LinkedIn for those who can't be with us this evening. This is our first networking event that we've done since lockdown, and we're delighted the Principal Hotel have helped us to make sure that we're very COVID secure and that we're keeping everyone safe. We've got a great presentation this evening from Ellis Hall, who's the head of partnerships at CNG Energy. As businesses are regrowing and bouncing back, energy is a huge use of theirs, and it's also one of those with a large carbon footprint. Alice is going to help us understand how business can tackle that challenge going forward. So without further ado, over to Alice.
Thank you, Nick. So, first I want to start with a little game, with a chance to win this book, which is called How Bad Are Bananas? Now, this is a book written by Mike Berners-Lee. This is a new edition that came out last week, and this basically gives you a view of everything carbon related. So what the carbon footprint of a banana may be, but what the carbon footprint of a text message will be. It's a really kind of useful guide for the everyday person that wants to look and understand how they can ultimately reduce their carbon footprint, which is what we're here to do tonight. So for those that haven't played Heads or Tails before, that's the game that we're going to play today. So it's basically a multiple choice. I'll read a question, or I'll show a question on the screen, and then if you think the answer is heads, please put your hand on your head, and if you think the answer is tails, then please put your hands down. If you do get the answer wrong, then please kind of remove yourself from the game. Because people have stood up and sat down, I'm not going to be able to tell, so please just be honest with it. So we'll get started on the first question. Bearing in mind, a lot of the answers are quite close together, so it is purely a guessing game, so don't worry if you don't know the answers. So, renewable and nuclear energy accounted for what percentage of fuel used for electricity generation in 2019? Is it heads 48% or tails 44%? So if you think the answer is heads, put your hands on your head. If you think the answer is tails, put your hands. So the correct answer is heads 48%. So anyone that their hands down, you're out of that round. So question 2. In 2019, which sector emitted more CO2 equivalent emissions? Is it heads, business, or tails, residential? Heads, business, or tails, residential? Has everyone answered? Correct answer is tails, residential, and it was only by about 1%, so residential was about 19% and business was about 18%. How many people are still left in? Okay, question 3. Since 1990, greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced by what percent? Is it heads 37% or tails 42%? Heads 37%, tails 42%. The correct answer on that one is tails 42%. How many left? 2. Right, I'm gonna skip a few questions because I've got a tiebreaker, and this is one that came actually out of this book. So for this one, I want you to just give me a number on this. So it's not a heads or tails, it's the closest number wins. So how many million tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions did the Australian bushfires emit in 2019? Now, to make it easy, it's anywhere between 0 and 999. Who wants to go first?
500.
500?
650.
The answer is 923 million tonnes, so we have a winner of that. So yeah, that fact is actually in there.
Oh, thank you very much.
And there you go. Very interesting. Thank you. An interesting fact about this is that actually these CO2 emissions from the Australian bushfires last year was the equivalent of 2% of the global carbon footprint of 2019. So those kind of bushfires obviously destroyed so many people's lives, but the carbon impact on that as well is quite significant. So, following on from that, thanks to everyone obviously for coming tonight. Obviously it's a nice small room to start. And my name's Ed Saul, obviously, as Nick introduced, I'm head of partners at C&G. So I've been with C&G for the last 4 years. Before that, I was actually teaching scuba diving in Australia, and then before that, I had a small coffee business. But they all do link together in a certain way, and it is actually around the sustainability side of things. So when I was in the coffee business, we really focused on how we bought our coffee. So we bought our coffee direct from farmers, ensuring that they would achieve fair price, way above the market price that they would achieve usually from a typical commodity sense. And then when I was obviously teaching scuba diving in Australia, it was kind of working in a wildlife marine park where you were teaching the students the, I guess, responsible diving, so to speak, and protecting and the importance of, I guess, the oceans today. And then I've been at C&G, as mentioned, for roughly 4 years now, and since starting I came in to look at what alternative renewable options are actually out there for businesses as being a commercial supplier. And then since February I have taken on this new role where I look at the renewable options as well as other solutions for small and medium businesses, and also head up our wholesale division, so our shipping services that we provide to other suppliers in the market. And one of the things that I'm probably most proud of actually being involved in is kind of this project, which was a low carbon project that we did non-for-profit for 600, not 600 kids there, but 600 students in Kenya, where we try to use renewable energy to show that actually it's not just great for the economic benefit of businesses, and it doesn't just help people reduce the carbon footprint, but it can actually add a lot of value to people's lives. So we converted from this shower block, so to speak, to something a little bit better, where we use solar power to do that, and kind of try to highlight how amazing kind of renewable energy could actually be when used appropriately. So today there's 3 kind of key areas that I wanted to discuss with you. And one of them is my view on sustainability. There's loads of different terms that get bandied around with sustainability or green or low carbon and renewable and blue, and they all mean slightly different things. So we'll talk about sustainability and what that means. The next thing is energy and renewable or low carbon options that are out there today. I do always like to put low carbon in things because not all the solutions that we're going to talk about are actually renewable, but they are more beneficial for business today. And then finally, just some simple measures that businesses can actually take to do this. I think a lot of the time it can be quite difficult for people to understand where to start. Because sustainability is so big, it can be a bit overwhelming for people to really understand and actually start their journey. So, sustainability, really what is it? And ultimately, it is about finding a balance, and it's effectively being able to coexist and allow us to use the resources that we've got today without detriment to future generations. And sustainability, for those that obviously do know and don't know, it kind of covers 3 principal areas, which is the environmental, the economic, and the social practices within that. So, predominantly today, obviously, we're going to talk about the environmental focuses, which is what a lot of people assume sustainability to be all about. But we're also going to talk about some renewable options out there that, although they're renewable, they're not necessarily sustainable because they might have too much of an economic impact on the business for them to be able to deem it viable to kind of pursue it. And you'll hear a lot more businesses in the future start to talk about the triple bottom line, which is people, profit and planet. And those 2 things fit nicely into obviously what sustainability is. And it's ensuring that when you're trying to generate profit for your business, that you're also considering the people as a planet and what the impact it actually has. So why is it important now? And to be honest, I don't think it's now that it's important. I think it's always been important. I think it's always been important for businesses. I think it's always been important for individuals. Climate change happens over a period of 30 years and it's not something that's new. And it's just a lot more visible now. We've got the ability to see things wherever in the world, and we can actually start to understand things that we're doing and how they're impacting somebody on the other side of the world. One of the things that I obviously put on the slide was about the Australian bushfires, and people will say that actually it was potentially an arson attack, and it got overhauled and got out of hand. But there's an element of the global warming, as much as we deem that we want warmer summers in the UK, as we all say, we want really nice warm summers and global warming is great, but it doesn't just stop at having nice warm weather, it's all the harsher, extreme weather conditions. And the reason I talk about it being extreme is for the impact that it could have on businesses and the energy industry in general. Having really volatile weather conditions, whether it's extreme coldness, extreme droughts, can actually have a huge impact on market volatility, and that ultimately will ultimately pass on to businesses and then consumers, and that's where it will get to, and everyone will be affected, unfortunately. But really, what it comes down to is the amount of carbon that we're emitting. And one of the things that I like to think of when talking about sustainability is something called chawa, which it's a funny word, but it's a Japanese word, and it's about a Japanese way of life, and it basically means searching for balance. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to a point within the UK where we can input carbon into the atmosphere at the same rate that carbon can be taken out of the atmosphere by natural carbon sinks, such as the oceans, such as the soil and the land and the trees, basically. And when we get to that point of balance, I think that's when we'll really be able to say that we are sustainable. And one of the huge things that I think you'll have all seen is this word, is this net zero. And net zero is achieving that carbon neutrality from 1990 levels. And actually, from 1990, as you know, we reduced our carbon footprint by 42% already, so we're 58% left to go, so to speak. But there's still a lot of work to do with obviously the growing demand on resources and energy, so to speak, on a daily basis. So net zero is this big launch and this big campaign, really, of what we can do to try and combat a lot of the issues, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in waste, whether it's in transport, whether it's in energy, and ultimately reaching net zero is the goal. But the UK climate emissions aren't obviously a huge problem, but it's about how we can kind of lead the way for other countries and kind of set the example, and I think that's really where the UK needs to be. So what does that really mean for you as a business? So as we touched on, 18% of carbon emissions are from businesses. That doesn't usually include your energy, because the energy that's generated from electricity usually accounts at the point of when it's actually being generated. So that 18% will cover all your other business operations, so to speak. And within that 18%, these are the types of emissions. So when talking about an individual or an organisation's carbon footprint, usually these are the emissions that are spoken about. So this encompasses all of your organisation and what you do and all your practices. So scope 1 emissions are effectively the direct burning of fuels. So whether that's through transportation, such as cars that you drive, whether it's a fleet car or if it's just a company car, or whether you're burning gas in your premises. Scope 2 emissions are the electricity or the purchase of heat or steam. So district heat networks, which are large networks under the ground that may be powered by a CHP system, which is big combustion engine which generates heat. Businesses may buy that heat, and that's classed as those emissions. Or your electricity, like I've mentioned, because that comes from when it is being generated at the production plant through, I don't know, fossil fuels, so to speak. And then finally, your scope 3 emissions, which is probably one of the most important, and this is you're effectively managing your supply chain. So what happens outside, I guess, of your control, but it's about positioning yourself and understanding when you've got a good or a service that you've sold, or you're travelling on a bus, or you've got waste that needs to be treated, or it's the end of life for a certain product, so to speak. We all have mobile phones, we all have laptops, and we use them on a daily basis, and we use the electricity, obviously, that powers them. But what happens when that laptop is put in the bin? Where does it go? What happens with it then? And that's the end of life things that people consider. So it's identified as upstream and downstream. And although we want to focus really on scope 2 and scope 1 to start with, because you can have a direct control over that, your scope 3 emissions will add a lot of value further down the line to the business, which we will come on to. And I know I'm a bit late to this, but by the way, that jumping screen is not me. So I think we've had a couple of technical issues, so to speak. But, you know, looking at the options that are out there, and I think that there's a lot of information about carbon and what actually that means for businesses and for consumers. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was these potential options, and what they actually mean and what they actually look like. So some of them are renewable, some of them are low carbon, some of them are really more about optimization and looking at your efficiency. So we'll start with green gas. Green gas was one of the first things that I looked at when I came to CAG. And it is actually a renewable option for businesses. And it's basically natural gas that's produced through waste. So burning of waste or decomposition of organic matter, so to speak. Over a period of time, it produces a gas, and then that gets fed into the grid, the same that all of the gas gets fed into the grid. And it's basically this big pot under the ground, and then hotels, restaurants effectively pull it out and burn it as and when they need it. This is one that, although it is renewable, it's not sustainable. And the reason it's not sustainable at the moment for businesses is because the price of this can vary anywhere between 10 and 30% extra on a normal gas product. Now, unless a business has got a lot of money to be able to fund it, a lot of the time they're not going to want to spend that additional cost on something that doesn't actually do anything to their business. So that's why at the moment, as much as green gas is a really nice thing to have for businesses, it doesn't actually hold a lot of value at the moment. And I think that the UK grid in general, about 0.3% of the UK grid is made up from green gas at the moment. And I know the government are looking at more investment, but it'll be a long time really before that has the maturity to be able to kind of stand on its own two feet. So that's why I wanted to put carbon offsetting in there, because carbon offsetting, there's a lot of controversy around carbon offsetting and what that looks like. Because carbon offsetting is effectively buying a certificate to say that you going on a flight somewhere and a carbon offset is okay. Well, it's not necessarily the right thing to do, but what it does do is it gets people understanding about it, and it's a step on the ladder, so to speak. And although it may not be perfect, it's a lot better than, I guess, trying to force someone and switching someone off when you're telling them that a green gas price is 30% more expensive than what they're already paying. So it's almost like a backup, so to speak. And then you've got the likes of biomass boilers, sourcing wood to fuel a boiler. You've got on-site generation. We've all seen solar. We've seen it slapped over loads of people's houses. There's so many incentives out there for kind of, I guess, businesses to go and install it onto people's roofs. They all looked at domestic. Unfortunately, I think it fell over slightly very few people benefited from what the incentives actually look like, but actually for businesses, we typically operate when the sun's out, so it works really well as long as you can fit your usage in your business with how electricity is generated through solar. Wind actually took it out because you can't really get wind operating on your building, so unfortunately it's not come out there. But CHP, another one. CHP is using gas, so unfortunately it's not renewable. But it is very low carbon. And then you've got EV. We've got this huge launch of EV and what that really looks like. I think we're expected to have about 35 million electric vehicles on the road by 2050. So it's quite considerable. And since June to June, we've had an increase of 262% electric vehicle registration. So a lot more people are actually taking them up. And they are a lot better than the typical combustion engine. But why is this going green? Which is I quickly want to touch on. Yes, there's economic benefit. Yes, there's environmental benefit. And yes, you can do it for doing the right thing. But as mentioned before, the Scope 3 emissions are a huge part. And it doesn't just add value to your business now and for the future. What it can do is it can strengthen your position in your own supply chain. So a lot of the time, you will be in many different businesses' supply chains, whether you offer services or whether you give services. And if you're seen to be actively pursuing a carbon strategy or a sustainability strategy and rolling out an environmental, social and governance strategy, then businesses are going to actively want to work with you. We all manage our own supply chain as individuals on a daily basis. We all actively choose to maybe buy something that is more low carbon. We may actively decide to go on a train instead of driving the car. We may decide to not buy that plastic bottle. And these are all things that people as individuals are doing to manage their own supply chain. And over a period of time, more and more businesses are going to start doing it with their kind of business interactions, so to speak. So there's a lot more value in it than just the sustainability. So I'm going to fire through these practical steps that you as a business can ultimately take. Now the first thing to do is, number one, is understand where you're currently at. So when it comes to energy, what do you use, how do you use it? So until you understand how you use your energy or what it actually looks like, you don't have the ability to make the improvements. You may want to do things, but is it necessarily the right thing to do? Once you understand it, it's about trying to optimise your energy usage as best as you possibly can. So how can you potentially look at how you're using it based on your tariff? You might be getting charged when you're using loads of electricity. And could you move that to use it at a different point to actually reduce your cost? Could you look at obviously LED lighting? Could you look at battery storage? Could you look at air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, which were on the previous slide? And once you feel like you're fully optimised, then go and speak to the supplier about renewables and what they look like. Speak to the supplier, or speak to your consultant or your broker that might be able to advise you in a better way. Do they have the ability to provide you with a renewable electricity tariff? And if they don't, then that's where your opportunity is to shift that. Lastly, two quick points. You've got your own generation. So once you feel like you've captured all that and you've got a bit of energy and you think, right, I use my energy when the sun's out, can you look at doing on-site generation and capitalising on that last bit and removing yourself from the grid and adding more value from an economic and social and environmental point of view. And then finally, if you feel like you've done all that, then that's when you start looking at the offsetting side of things. But one of the things that I wanted obviously to leave you with is the fact that doing those things, everybody's in the same boat. So don't worry if you don't know where to start. The best thing you can do is ask someone. So before I summarise, I just want to do a quick Q&A with you all, if you've got any questions on what we've spoken about. Yes?
Just coming back to that understanding piece on the first of your 5 steps of what to do, from your experience in the businesses that you've spoken to, what's the best way to start that process? Because there's so many different strands that the sustainability could fit in. Like, what are the quick wins and where do you start?
Yeah, so when it comes to, looking at this from an energy point of view, it ultimately comes back to finding out where the data is and where it's held. So one of the things I would recommend is going to speak to a supplier or the consultant that you source things through, because they're likely to be able to guide you in the best way as to how you do things next. When it comes to your carbon overall, it's potentially about going and looking at your business as a whole and what key things do you do. So what energies do you use? What does your waste look like? What does your water look like? What is your overall supply chain? And really understand those key areas and ask the people around you that do these sorts of things. So within your supply chain, ask those suppliers about it, because they're likely to be able to already doing this and will be able to guide you on that. When it comes to your energy specifically, speak to the person that put you in that energy contract, okay? Whether it is a consultant or whether it's a supplier direct. And from that point, they should be able to advise. And if they can't, then that's when you maybe have to talk to someone else. Because if you've got an idea of something, of what you want to do, I guarantee there's someone out there that will be able to provide you with a solution for it. It's just about asking. And I find that asking the right people is probably the best way.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned green gas as
Yeah.
not sustainable
Yeah.
because of price.
Yeah.
Is it sustainable in terms of supply?
Absolutely. So the supply side of things is fine at the moment, and the government are looking at spending 150 million on injections into new plants to support growth of this sector. And the problem is it's kind of not even going to scratch the surface, unfortunately. And then the producers need to get the manufacturing to a point where it's more economically viable. At the moment, it costs too much to do it, so they need these incentives to justify the
So it's
cost.
sustainable as a supply,
It's
but it's just
sustainable.
economically not viable.
Economically, it doesn't add up, and therefore that's why it's ultimately the producer needs to get the consumer to pay for it to cover them, but then the consumer doesn't want to pay.
And where is this green gas coming from?
So green gas comes from predominantly all over the UK, and it typically starts in farmers.
So
So
it's
farms that have a lot of waste,
anaerobic.
digestion through food waste, through animal waste, through crops. There's varying different sources. There's also loads of other different biogas options out there.
Do you count hydrogen when you're talking about green gas, or do you see that as distinctly separate at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment I didn't want to touch on hydrogen because it's very much a thing that I would say people are looking at it now, but from a future point of view that hydrogen can be great. Is stuff that we need to do in terms of how we generate hydrogen. At the moment, a lot of it is produced through methane reformation, where they take natural gas and break it down. But then you've still got the carbon aspect. Unless that carbon's captured, you're still emitting that carbon, and that's classed as blue hydrogen. And then you've got green hydrogen, which is electrolysis. But yeah, that is a little bit further down the line, so I didn't want to kind of throw that in the
But it's happening, I think, right now, isn't
But
it?
it is happening, you know. Up at Keele University, they're doing a test where they're putting 20% hydrogen into the natural gas pipes. Methane's perfect for carrying hydrogen. At the end of the day, it's part of methane, so it makes perfect sense, and there's a lot of energy in it. I think people are scared of hydrogen in a certain sense from what happened with that famous blimp that blew up.
Isn't there a big...
Methane blows up as well, though, doesn't it?
Methane does. They
Well,
all
I think there's a plant being built in Hull, or proposed in Hull, isn't it, for a hydrogen plant, I think?
I wish I had answered.
Well, I can tell you there is.
Yeah, yeah, there's about, for EV fuel cell cars, so using hydrogen to power cars as well, there's about 14 fueling stations at the moment in the UK. We see EVs and electric vehicles doing so much. There's a whole other argument about whether lithium ion is sustainable, but I don't want to get onto that. There's loads that can be spoken about, but yeah, there's so much going on. It's really hard to understand where to start. That's why I think that we're all in the same boat, and we all just want to start that journey. So the best thing to do is ask the people around you, and slowly taking little nuggets of knowledge everywhere, and eventually you'll be able to come to this kind of plan and strategy about how it impacts you as a business. Because at the end of the day, every business is individual. You need to find your own plan that works for you.
There is an alternative. Call Ellis.
Yeah.
Try to, yeah. Now, I'm more than happy to obviously field any questions further down the line. But thanks very much.
Alice, thank you very much indeed. A very interesting subject and one that should be relevant to all businesses. And I'm delighted that Alice Hall from CNG is being able to present at the IOD's very first hybrid event. Thank you to the small group in the room here and to those watching both on YouTube and on LinkedIn. If you look at the IOD Yorkshire and North East LinkedIn site, you'll find the video of tonight. So you can have a look in there, watch it again maybe, think through, again, there's a lot of issues to connect with. You also connect with Ellis Hall on LinkedIn as well, which would be nice to help you through that route. My name's Nick Bradley, I'm the founder and CEO of Mandala Leaders. Delighted to connect with you all on LinkedIn too. And I'm an ambassador for the Institute of Directors here in the board. And we're delighted to have this event and hopefully many more COVID-secure events, hybrid events going forward. So thank you to Alice, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Rose and Helena for making sure this event was not only here, present and correct, but safe as well. And thanks to the Principal Hotel for hosting us.